Welcome to another session. I hope you were well. In today's session, I want to talk about your thoughts and how your thoughts play a part in whether you live a depression free life or a depression filled life and experience. I began a few sessions back and I started to explain how when we try to talk about depression and its cure, understanding it or conquering it, there should be a focus on the holistic approach to depression. In order to understand the holistic method or the steps to take or the strategy to adopt holistically, it is necessary to start with perhaps a worldview. I shared mine in summary that we're not just physical beings, despite what most people think. For example, I am sitting on the chair and there is a limitation to what this chair can carry in terms of weight. If I put too much weight on this chair, eventually the chair will break. The reason is simply because the chair has been designed to be able to take a certain level of objective, you might say force. Human beings are very, very different. I don't know about you, but I will perhaps wager that if you were to look at your life, that there have been times when you've been, I guess, overburdened to a point of your physical abilities, and for some reason you found the energy, you found the ability to draw on reserves or to overcome what may have plagued you as an obstacle or as a burden. And the reason for that is because you're not just an objective being, there's something metaphysical about you, and there's something even much greater. My worldview and my philosophy is that we are spiritual. We're spiritual beings. We are a spirit. We do not have a spiritual experience. That would be absurd from my worldview because we are spirits. Instead, what we have is a physical experience because we are spirits housed in a physical form we call our bodies. We've also been given this intellect that bridges the gap between our physical abilities and our spiritual divine self. And with that intellectual part of our personality or our being, we can draw on what we call the higher parts of who we are uh, and to help us deal with things that occur in the lower level, which is the physical. So we're spiritual beings, we live in a physical body, we have an intellect. And in the sessions prior, I mentioned how we have intellectual faculties, and these, in many ways, place us in a similar footing as the angels, if you believe in such, in that we have the ability to create our own world. We can we can create a future that does not exist through our intellectual faculties, and by creating that, we tap into our spiritual um, side of our who we are, and then we draw the body into that manifestation process in the future. So we start off with nothing, we create something, and we move or we cause the body by virtue of how we use the intellect and specifically the mind to bring us into that reality that we have created. This is available to all parties and all persons. We're all essentially the same, and the more you study other people, the more you understand how they have capabilities that you have. They may have, you might say, uh, skill sets that they have trained and learned and developed over time that make them separate from you in terms of outcomes. But fundamentally, there's only one spirit. It animates itself through each of us differently. There is only one mind. We all have essentially access to the same intellectual faculties, but there are different bodies. And so one of the things I started with is trying to understand how to keep your body in a fit state. And in the first part of the series, we dealt with that. Now, in the second half, we're dealing with the intellect and the mind. So, in today's session, as I start the process of explaining how your thoughts formed? Or rather, I should ask, pose it as a question. How are your thoughts formed? It's key to understand that if you suffer from anxiety or depression or concern or worry, or perhaps the inability to control your emotions and having fluctuating mood swings, one of the reasons could be primarily because you do not understand at the basic level how your mind functions and how to use your intellect. Now, I mentioned in the session prior that we have faculties, intellectual faculties, imagination, memory, will, perception, intuition, and all of these faculties enable us. They're not, you might say, they're not limited to the 5 or 6 faculties. There's so much, there are many more, but these are the core ones. Whereas if you understand how they function, then most of, I guess, the suffering that comes to people's lives by virtue of depression can be minimized. The key part of this whole process is understanding the mind. Now, I mentioned we have a conscious mind and we have a subconscious mind. They have different functions. You might say, like a coin, they can't be separated. But what is necessarily important is your subconscious mind is what regulates your level of depression or your level of well-being. It's what's in your subconscious mind. But what goes into your subconscious mind begins with a thought. And therefore the question is, how can I control my thoughts? Now, let me say something that perhaps will be counterintuitive as I move forward. You cannot stop a thought from passing through your mind. You cannot. That is important to understand, because you see people who practice different, you might say, lifestyle choices will tell you that if you want to reduce depression, you should try to meditate or practice a form of meditation such as yoga. And as part of a practice, there's an effort to stop you from thinking about anything, where you empty your thoughts, your mind completely of any thoughts. Well, the way the mind works, the mind is always moving towards a thought or moving away from a thought. And therefore, the law of displacement is something to keep in mind with regards to your thoughts and your mind and depression. Now, in the sessions that come in the future, I will talk about the laws you have to understand. The law of displacement is a simple principle. It simply says that if you want to get light to displace darkness, you simply have to understand that they are both one and the same in different spheres. That there is darkness in this space. If I were to turn off the light switch, darkness will return. So the way we actually remove darkness is to displace darkness with light, and vice versa. Similarly, your thoughts are either moving towards one, moving away from one, or repeating the same one. So you always have thoughts in your mind. The question is, for those who have depression or who suffer from depression, for which it's not clinical, and also for which it's not physical, but is simply psychological or mental, understanding how to regulate and control and choose the right thoughts could help you eliminate your anxiety and your depression. By thoughts, what we want is created. By feelings, is sent to us. By expectation and action, we receive it. But we do not always choose our thoughts. Sometimes our thoughts are chosen for us. Similarly, we do not always make the right decision to move away from a thought, because we live a life of habit, and we live a life of, you might say, routine. And therefore, sometimes we catch ourselves thinking about things we do not want, but we do not understand how to move away from that thought, because and just keep this in mind, if I were to say to you, I don't want you to think about this pen. Whatever you do for the next few seconds, do not think about this pencil, rather. Do not think about this pencil. Now, it doesn't matter who you are. As long as I say do not think about this pencil and I hold this pencil and you're concentrating on this pencil, you will think about the pencil. The only way you can stop thinking about this pencil is to bring a different thought. And that thought might be a mobile phone. Now, the moment I present this to you, your mind moves away from the pencil towards the mobile phone. Now, if I were to drop the mobile phone, your mind returns back to this thought. It's dominant thought, or a reoccurring thought, or its last thought. So one of the things to understand about your mind is, how do your thoughts come about? Now, the way the mind works is we do not think always in words alone. We think in pictures and we think in words. So for example, when I say phone, mobile phone, as you listen to me, you're not thinking MOBILEPHONE. What comes to your mind is a phone. Why? We think in pictures. If I said to you to think about your father, a picture comes to your mind. You're not thinking FATHER or DAD. A picture comes to your mind because we think in pictures. Now, when we read, or for some of us who are very analytical, who love numbers, when we read and when we study, when we practice in whatever form, we formulate numbers and we convert those numbers through the faculties of the mind into pictures. Now, what this means is that if you want to understand how your thoughts are formed, you can start with what you see. Your eyes are gateways into your mind because your eyes, and by virtue of the sensory ability you have, you can gather images. Those images go into your conscious mind, but they do not translate into your subconscious mind, absent space repetition or emotion. So, if you start off with a thought, either a thought that has been presented to you by an image, if you continue to look at that image and you space the repetition of that image and the presentation of that image in your mind, done over a consecutive time, that thought becomes dominant and it will be planted in your subconscious mind. On the other hand, another way to deal with this would be to say, if you have an image of pain, an image of yourself that's not being happy, an image of yourself being a depressed person, if you connect an emotion to that image, if that emotion is potent and strong, that image goes into your subconscious mind. Your thoughts create your self-image. Your self-image is the reason and the cause, primarily, something I'll cover later, but your self-image is primarily responsible for whether you live an abundant, well-being, abundant life or a depressed, anxious, unhappy life. When people say, I feel depressed or I am depressed, depression effectively in many ways could be considered a clinical picture. It's a symptom of something underlying. The root cause is self-image. That self-image is located in your subconscious mind. If you want to change the outcomes you have in your life or the results, you do not work on the results. You do not work on the actions. You start with the thoughts that created the self-image. In other words, you have to change yourself in your mind first before you can change yourself in the physical. So one of the key things to understand is that your thoughts are determining and are controlling your life. So what we have to do is practice the law of displacement on a regular basis. We do not replace a negative thought with a more negative thought. Instead, what we do is we use a positive thought to displace a negative thought. It's part of the reason why the ancient writers would say, for those who are weak, let them say, I am strong. The reason is simple. Because if you say, I am weak, and you accept weakness, it goes into your subconscious mind, It forms an image of who you are, and we cannot, for a sustained period of time, outperform our self-image. Today is not a session of self-image. I will cover that in another session, but suffice it to say, you cannot outperform your self-image. The image you have of yourself is regulating and acts as a governor for your outcomes. So if you are suffering from depression, it means you have a self-image in your subconscious mind that you may not be aware of, or that you might be aware of, that is of a person who actually has and owns depression. In other words, what you hate, even if you hate depression, or what you love, even if for those who might love maybe an aspect of a personality, what you hate and what you love, you attract by virtue of your thoughts. Your thoughts create a resonance, a vibration, an energy, a frequency, and that frequency draws everything to it in the same wavelength. So the key thing to keep in mind is that thoughts can be both positive and thoughts can be negative. And what you should be doing regularly is flushing your mind with positive, good thoughts to displace the negative thoughts that come across your way. Now, for most people are exposed to hundreds of thousands of pictures, images, thoughts on a daily basis that do not edify the spirit, that do not give you encouragement. There is so much doom and gloom presented to us for our sake, based on our demands, sometimes not our demands. And for that reason, we are constantly surrounded by negative ideas, negative thoughts. And therefore, we tend to find that we are in a state of negative vibration or feeling by virtue of the thoughts we have, or the thoughts we are given and we accept. By thoughts, I'm referring to whatever you might consider to be an input. What you see, what you hear, the associations around you, these are all energy vibrations. Sometimes it comes in the form of an idea you think about. Sometimes it comes in the form of an image presented to you from your sensory faculty sight. Sometimes it comes from what you hear, which is then converted into another energy form, which is an image, or it might be association. Your thoughts will determine your feelings. So if there's a feeling you have that you're not happy with, you don't change the feeling, you change the thought, because the thought effectively is the root cause. The feeling is like a clinical picture. And so by thoughts, we're referring to things you see, things you hear, the influences around you, and your associations. Those will regulate and control your feelings. Your feelings will control your actions. Your actions will determine, when repeated over time, a habit, which will form into a lifestyle, which will create the person you are and the outcomes you have. If you want to change the outcomes or the results of your life, you do not start with the results. You start with the thoughts. So for example, if you feel you are depressed and you are struggling from depression, and the outcomes of your life are not what you want for yourself, you don't focus on the results. You go back to the basics. You start with the thoughts in your mind and the thoughts that have formed your self-image. Every depression crisis, every anxiety issue is a self-image issue, especially for most people. There will be exceptions, yes, but the exceptions prove the rule. Yes, there's a fringe group which have clinical issues, and certainly I'm not speaking to such a group. For the general population, most of the concerns we have, anxiety issues, depression issues, issues of lack of purpose, lack of happiness, an absence of meaning, comes down to the self-image, but also breaks down to your thoughts. So you have to understand how your thoughts are created. But once you've understood how your thoughts are created, you have to understand how the mind takes those ideas or thoughts or inputs and converts that into, you might say, a working mechanism to create the person you are. Now, in the session that follows, I'll cover this in a little bit more detail, but suffice it to say that um, most of us suffer unnecessarily because we do not know how things work. My hope is that as you listen, you understand how things work, and therefore you can help yourself if applicable to you. You see, my hope is that I can get to those who really want help. Over my years in life, I have understood and I've come to accept that you cannot help someone who doesn't recognize that they are in a prison. Now, you and I are in a prison to some extent or another. We're bound by chains, limitations, burdens, habits, historical traumas, etc., present traumas, but you cannot help someone who does not acknowledge that they are in a prison. And what I've also found, which is sad but also true, is that some people will not even participate in their own rescue even when help comes. So what I'm hoping is that at the end of this session that we have some form of a prison break. I'm hoping to come with some ideas. I want you to wrestle with the ideas and don't worry about how it's been delivered or what's been said, the manner in which it's been said. Just apply them. If you're struggling and you're not happy, apply them and see whether they help you grow, improve, and become and transform yourself into the person you can be. Now, I'll say this, no one is better than you and no one is inferior to you. We are all essentially the same. The tools I'm sharing, I've learned from other people. The rules of the game that I'm giving to you, I have learned from other people. Success leaves behind clues. Find success and just copy it, replicate it. Replicability comes from science. If you find a formula that works, it means anybody can use that formula. It's like a key. You have the key, the lock opens. Now, in the session that follows, I'll go into some more detail on this whole thought thing and how it connects to your self-image and how it also connects to your mind, and more importantly, how it connects to your well-being. Now, I hope today's session has been of some value.